Yeah,
Right.
I wanted to put the question to you all this week. Heather and I have talked about this before, and we've talked about it in the context of being on airplanes, right? But my question to you all is, what is your experience of people who just, when you get into a conversation about politics, people who just seem to just completely disregard the fact that you are a professional knower of politics?
Yeah.
What's your experience of this?
Like all of my training, knowledge, reading, degrees, writing just doesn't matter.
You see on social media a lot, right?
I
Yeah.
decided to tell people that I do something else.
Mm-hmm.
Because as soon as you drop in, like, oh, yeah, I teach politics, then they have to talk to you about Trump.
Mm-hmm.
And they obviously know more than I do. So they're trying to tell me, how what I'm doing is wrong or what I know is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So my mom and other people, I put up a tweet one time about this, and people were like, just tell them you like teach math and they won't have any follow-up questions about that.
Right? Chemistry, something. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good idea.
I
I mean,
started,
what
I
kind of
started,
experiences have you had with this?
I've been in a few different situations, usually like with air travel, right? Because you're always stuck next to just some terrible person.
Yeah.
But yeah, you see it on social media as well. So I decided like maybe 4 years ago that I wasn't going to just let stuff slide on social media. I was going to like correct people, and so I did this thing where, have you ever seen a Jonathan Pie video? So
No.
Jonathan Pie is it's a character, and you can look it up like later, where it's a comedian who basically pretends to be one of those newscasters. So he's standing in front of the Houses of Parliament in London, and he's like,
Yes.
and the secretary for such and such said blah blah blah. Back to you in the studio, and then the camera like cuts, but it's still recording, and he's like, "Oh fucking hell, Tom, blah blah blah," and he starts like ranting about the thing he's just talked about.
Yeah.
So he did an episode in the University of Salford, which is in Manchester. It's just outside Manchester, and it's around this area called Media City, which is where a lot of the TV companies move their like satellite studios. And they introduced like a ban on swearing because it's a public area and there's a lot of kids around. So you're not actually allowed to, you're not supposed to swear in public.
Yeah.
So he started ranting about this, and then he said, "Oh, they're not even teaching, To Kill a Mockingbird without trigger warnings." And I was like, "All right, fuck this." So I went on to the replies and said, "Actually, the reason that they're giving trigger warnings for To Kill a Mockingbird is because anybody in the class might have had an experience such as that, and might want to know that they're going to be confronted with it in a classroom." And it was like 200 replies of people, people telling me to kill myself and stuff. And I was like, this is crazy, right? But a few people sent me like messages to say like, thanks for saying that. And that was kind of cool. But basically this was this thing where like, okay, now I'm just going to like, just tell people and I'm going to have conversations with them. And again, the dynamic's different, which is why I wanted to ask you all what your experiences were, because when I sit on a plane with a guy who wants to tell me how screwed up it is that the deep state is doing this to Trump and everything, like it's okay for me to kind of slowly talk my way around this bullshit by saying, well, don't you think it was a mistake for him to do such and such? And then eventually, they end up kind of knowing, but it's a lot of work.
It is a lot of work.
And I don't know that you ever really changed their mind, but you see it. I mean, Kelley was having various conversations with people on Facebook this week, right? And you see people kind of aggressively disagreeing with you, despite the fact that your day to day is U.S. politics, right? And it's this weird thing, and I just wonder where do you all think this comes from?
I think it's just at this point in time, it's terrible, but just the abhorrence for anything that is intellectual, scientific. I mean, we're trusting pandemic YouTube videos instead of doctors and nurses. I mean,
Yeah.
I think it's just this kind of anti-intellectual just moment that we're in. And as soon as I, say, oh, well, professor, it's just they almost immediately liberal know-it-all. And yeah, but that I own that, right? I think that's the difference is it seems to me that when you point out their flaws, they get really upset. You point mine out, and I'm like, no, that's I do sometimes tend to be pedantic, and I probably sound arrogant, maybe. I accept that. But as soon as you say, well, you're blinded by your love of this man, and if it was any other person, you wouldn't accept it. Like they're not willing to give that concession,
Yeah. So for me, what I struggle with sometimes is Facebook. Sometimes I want to, engage on a lot of these posts, but I think like I engage, and then at what cost am I engaging? Is it actually helping the situation or hurting the situation?
Yeah.
So I've had people who have on my feed and who are friends,
Mm-hmm.
put up things that are factually incorrect, or that easily, if you were to just do a Google search, you would find that what they've just put out there, right, is either some kind of conspiracy theory or just flat out wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've had these instances where finally I'm like, all right, I'm going to come in and I'm going to say like, hey, here's a link. Check this out. This isn't true.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when I've done that, sometimes people go, oh, my bad. I'll take it down.
Mm-hmm.
But those are actually fairly rare. I find more pushback than the takedown.
Mm-hmm.
And recently I found not only the pushback, but there was something that was circulating that was absolutely 100% fake. Oh, I do know what it was. It was the thing about Bernie and how he was going to tax people who made below a certain income. So he would end up taking like 75% of their income. It was that image that I don't know where the image came from, but it definitely wasn't from Bernie's website, right? It wasn't from his tax plan. And I was like, actually, y'all, that's wrong. And I put up like the actual website and I put all these things. Well, this person saw that and was like, well, I don't believe anything that his supporters believe. Like they're lying about this. And I'm like, first of all, I'm not a Bernie supporter, but just go to the website and check it out for yourself. Like just do your thing.
Yeah.
And those images got reported to Facebook as being fake, right? That like these have been doctored or whatever. This isn't true. So then Facebook started like remove stuff. So this person's post got reported and was removed, and the very next day put it up again. And I'm like, you are a troll because you are continuing to put up things that are false, and it's false because I've already told you and you have proof that it's false, but you're continuing to do that. So the research on this shows that honestly, it's better for us to call it out than to let it go.
Yeah.
Because if you call it out, that means, by somebody putting it out there that's fake or false, other people reading it are going to think, oh my God, like if that confirms what they already thought, then they're going to share it with all their friends, and then they're going to continue to share it and continue to share it. So the research shows that we should be saying something, but that it's only effective for that person to take it down if there's one more person that will come in and like confirm what you just said. So if I say, oh, hey, by the way, that's not entirely true, check out the Snopes article, then if Andrew goes in and goes, hey, yeah, I looked that up too, and like do it in a gentle way, then the person's more likely to say, my bad, and they'll take it down.
That's the interesting thing, right? It's all to do with like, we need to have this tone. And I find that interesting because that's kind of what we need to do in the classroom, right? When you have the kind of the angry, typically older white man in your class that will start saying things that are, false. And, you need to have this way of kind of talking around them and just kind of say, look, that's not the case. And it's kind of interesting that you the social media is just such a, I don't know, like, I think part of it is great, and then a lot of it is just terrible. Like,
I agree.
it's toxic, and it's angry, and it's, you know, the rigging elections and all the rest of it. And it's tough, right? But again, you know, there's a difference between, I mean, on social media, I don't know if it's quite as much of a difference when you're dealing with, you know, if you're on Twitter and you see all the replies that come into Twitter. But I mean, Heather and I were talking about this before, Kelley, that, you know, the city council here in San Antonio just passed a resolution that talking about the Chinese flu or the Kung Fu flu is considered hate speech, and it should be reported as such. Ted Cruz, who's off getting a haircut at the COVID barbers in Dallas today, sent a big tweet about it, and it's called, you know, the city council a bunch of like liberal college students or whatever, and that's our center,
Right.
you know.
Yeah, I mean, wow. We have to think of the political pressure that he's responding to, right? I mean, I can't stand 99% of the positions that Ted Cruz takes, but I have to believe that I know he's smart. I mean, he's an intelligent man. He's saying all these things to keep his job. You know, he would get primaried from the right if he didn't say all of this, even though I don't think he believes any of it. But that's the problem, is we need two functioning parties, and we don't have that, and it scares me. I want a healthy, strong, functioning GOP. I'm very liberal. I am a Bernie supporter, but like, can we go back to the McCain kind of, you know, traditional Rockefeller Republican that it's just nothing but fear mongering and hate at this point. You know, it's become the party of Trump, and I worry about how that's going to play out in the future. So, because
I also wonder if it's like the party of Trump, or if it's Trump is just the figurehead of the party of whoever it was that's kind of led them this way. You know, I forget who it is that keeps referring to Tom Cotton, but like, President Tom Cotton in 8 years' time is going to be much more effective at this than Trump. There isn't going to be the just meandering press conferences with him. You know, it's going to be like a different set of circumstances, and you know, that's going to be.
Oh, you made my heart drop to my stomach, like President Tom Cotton.
Are there any times when someone asks you what you do for a living that you lie?
Yeah.
I don't.
You don't. You go right at it.
Yeah, I say, you know, I mean, usually I'll just say I'm a professor.
And then they follow up with, what do you teach?
Yeah, and then they'll say, like, what do you do? And then I'll just tell them. I had a guy at San Antonio Airport a few years ago. I got into a conversation about, you know, because I'll usually say, like, you know, like, most of my teaching is American politics, like you both understand, you know, because you've been there. Mm-hmm. But, you know, I say, well, you know, I teach all this other stuff, you know, I teach terrorism and things like that. And this guy was making a point about the Syrian refugee crisis. And he was like, oh, you know, in Europe, you need to do this. I actually had this in San Diego at Christmas. We were in San Diego. We were at a San Diego State basketball game. And it just so happened we were sat in front of a guy who had a bunch of opinions on Brexit. And he was giving me the whole straight banana stuff. And I was like, yeah, I don't know if it's as much as the fake thing that you just, you know, I don't want to get into a fight with a guy at a basketball game about this. But at the same time, you know, so I did that thing. I did that thing where I was like, yeah, you know, I think it's more about this than that. You know, and I didn't say that the thing that you just said is bullshit, because we all know it's bullshit. Anyone who does a little Google, like you just said, Heather, knows that. But yeah, the guy at the airport was talking about it, and I said, well, you know, man, the thing that I think people need to consider is that this is a humanitarian crisis, you know, because there are children washing up on beaches like we just saw. And he was like, yeah, I'd never thought of it like that before. And that to me told me that like I'd done the right thing by talking to that guy, because it might not change his mind necessarily, but it maybe did. The people around us who overheard, you know, we're in Texas. There could have been a bunch of people who were like, Syrians, you know? And that's the other thing with Facebook is the people who read that, and you kind of made that point, Heather, the people who read that, who just believe it and they see it going unchallenged. And I know that, like, you know, Kevin Cruz, the history professor at Princeton, he's really big on this. He's like, the reason I reply to Dinesh D'Souza every day is because if I don't, then it goes unchallenged. You know, and real people do read that, you know, even though there's 5,000 trolls replying from Vladivostok.
Yep.
And I think that's, you know, that's an important thing that we do, but at the same time, it can just get so, you know.
Yeah, the last time I flew, there was a guy sitting next to me on a plane. It was from here to, I don't know, probably Charlotte or Atlanta. And he sits down and he wants to be chatty Cathy, right? And he's going to talk to me for a while. And he's like, so what do you do for a living? I was like, well, I'm a professor. What do you teach? Politics. Oh, well, gosh, I left my Veterans for Trump hat below the plane. It's in my luggage. I should have worn it.
Oh, me too.
I was like, great.
Yeah.
And he goes, so what do you think about Trump? I was like, you don't really want the answer to that. And he goes, no, I do. And I was like, you're going to be hard pressed to find people in academia who like him.
Yep.
And he went on, he wanted to ask other questions about impeachment. And then he made another statement, which was also odd. He said something to the extent of, this was actually right after, let's see, the Kobe Bryant, the crash.
Mm-hmm.
He said something to the extent of like, gosh, you know, it was so sad what happened to Michael Jordan the other day. And I was like, I don't think you mean Michael Jordan.
They all look alike, right?
I don't know. I mean, it was just like, and I could tell like people sitting across from us. So that's the thing, like what you were talking about, Andrew, that like other people around are obviously also hearing your conversation.
Yeah.
So I think that we probably should, as a discipline, be having these conversations because other people hear us. Yeah. And it's one of those things like, it's one thing for someone who doesn't have the degree, who hasn't done research, to talk to someone about politics when that person is obviously wrong. Yeah. And it's another thing for somebody who does have the degree, who does have the qualifications to say it, because then it's like, here's this person who has facts. Yeah. So then hearing them stand up or say like, actually, no, like, bless your heart. Actually, that's incorrect. And here's what actually happened. I think that's useful.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it can be difficult because, you know, usually you're talking about like, I mean, it probably varies, right? But usually you're talking about a guy. It's obviously, you know, we talked about this last week. It's obviously easier for me.
In my experience, it's always been a guy wanting to know what I do.
Yep.
Yeah. And part of that's just like the conversations you have on planes, right? There's always just some guy who's like, I'm bored. You're going to talk to me, right?
Right.
It's never me, by the way. I've got headphones in. I do not want to talk.
That's what I should be doing instead of talking to people about the fact that I'm a political.
Get your headphones in. Sometimes they'll still talk to you, of course. Yeah, I don't know. Part of me wonders. So in terms of like the cause of this, part of me wonders if is it that people just like don't really respect what it is that we do, or I mean, it could be that as well, or is it that, you know, when you're like, I don't know if you all would ever do this, but if you're ever watching like an argument between two sports commentators and you have the person who has played the game and then you have the like journalist, and then there's always this disconnect because there's well, you don't really understand because you're just a journalist, right? I was in the locker room, I was on the field, I did all this stuff, and you don't really understand it, right? So I wonder but that, you know, the journalist is still super into it. So I wonder if there's an element of like people that we know are just like super interested in politics, and then they read a certain amount, but they've never really like studied it.
Right.
And they're maybe not as good at like seeking out, the whole kind of falsifiability thing that we always kind of, is like the baseline of our arguments, not our conversations, but at least our arguments, like, what if I'm wrong about this? What is the evidence to prove that? And they never go there. And that's kind of where you lose a lot of the sort of deeper, like, scholarly rigor of the arguments. And I wonder if that's at work, is that people are just into it, and maybe it's partly they're like, well, that's not a real job, but also I read a decent amount of stuff, and I wonder if that's part of it.
Do you think that other disciplines have the same problem that we do, or is this something that's just about politics? Like, I'm just thinking that people who teach English don't get, 90 questions when they say that they teach English or math or physics, or is it just something elementary about when you say I teach politics?
Probably history too, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe.
Most people, sorry.
Go ahead.
Most people view politics as just partisan and opinion, and I don't think they understand that there's actually rigorous academic research behind it, and it isn't just polling, which everyone says, oh, you can rig a poll whichever way. I think most people just think, that kind of cognitive, politics, left, right, it's just opinion. How in the world can you go to school for years to learn how to express an opinion?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a good point. And I think when you look at like related subjects like sociology, I don't know that anyone ever associates. Sociologists would often have typically more liberal views than political scientists. Not necessarily us or the people that we know, but generally. And then you have like anthropologists as well, and I mean, they would all be studying very similar things, but I don't know that anyone ever really would do that to like a sociologist.
Honestly, I also think this has changed since Trump was elected. So before Trump was elected, I remember having some of these conversations, but they were kind of limited. I can remember having the birther conversation, kind of like, I got this email, and even a student once approached me and said, I got this email from like my aunt. Can you talk about this in class? And that was at the tipping point of the birther controversy. Yeah. I remember showing a video in class about it. I think it was from The Daily Show, where they like debunked all of it. Mm-hmm. And but I don't remember having these very somewhat uncomfortable conversations during his presidency. It's just been since. And even during the campaign, I felt like I was having more of those too.
Yeah. That's interesting. I mean, one of the other things, one of the kind of points I wanted to put to you both as well is one of my friends put it like this, and it was like, politics, some people think that politics is this thing that just happens incidentally to real life. It's not everything in real life like we would understand that it is. It's just this other thing. It's like this TV show that's also happening whilst you get on with your daily life. And I think maybe one of the things that we don't appreciate because this is what we do, is that a lot of people are like that, and it's just this kind of this distraction because their day to day is get up, go and do the things that they do on a typical day and then come home, and there's not really as much engagement with it. But yeah, I think, since Trump has been in office, I mean, on one hand, I find that the students are definitely more aware than perhaps they were before.
It's true. I
think that plays into the whole Biden campaign of let's get back to how normal things were in 2016, right? Or, whatever. But there's just so much more, like it's almost impossible to keep up.